The excavator was already idling when I stepped out to my ranch gates at 6:30 that morning. Diesel fumes mixed with the morning dew, and there she stood, Karen Whitmore in a hot pink tracksuit and hard hat, waving some papers like a battle flag. Behind her, two guys in coveralls were checking their watches. "Good morning, Mr. Riley." Her voice cut through the engine noise like nails on a chalkboard. "According to yesterday's homeowner association ruling, your fence violates new height requirements. Demolition starts right now." I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was still dreaming. But the smell of diesel was real, the rumble of machinery was real, and Karen's smug grin. Unfortunately, that was real too. "What ruling?" I stepped closer, boots crunching on gravel. "There wasn't any meeting yesterday." She thrust the papers at me, official letterhead, typed signatures, the whole 9 yards. 6.2 feet exceeds our new standard of 6 feet maximum. Unanimous vote. I scanned the document, my name, my address, my supposedly illegal fence. Everything looked official, except for one thing. I never got notice of any meeting. "Where's the original?" I asked. "In our office, under legal review." Karen's smile never wavered. "But this certified copy gives us authority to proceed." The excavator operator revved his engine. Message received. "Hold on." I pulled out my phone, dialed the homeowner association office. 3 rings, then a tired voice. "Mills County HOA. This is Tom Riley. I need to see the meeting minutes from yesterday." Long pause. "I'm sorry, Mr. Riley, but those documents are currently unavailable. They're with our attorneys for review." I hung up, stared at Karen. She was already directing the crew toward my fence. "You can't just tear down my property without proper notice." "We sent 3 letters," she said, not even looking at me. "Check your mailbox." I'd checked my mail every day for 20 years. Never missed a bill, never missed a notice. But 3 letters about fence violations? Not one. The excavator lurched forward. Its bucket scraped against my gatepost, metal on metal, like fingernails down my spine. "Stop!" I stepped between the machine and my fence. "I'm calling the sheriff." Karen laughed. "Go ahead. We have all the permits we need." That's when I noticed the 3rd guy. Clipboard, county badge, code enforcement officer. He walked over, hands in his pockets. "Mr. Riley, I'm Officer Jenkins. I've reviewed the documentation. Everything appears to be in order." "In order?" My voice cracked. "They're about to destroy my fence based on some meeting I was never told about." Jenkins shrugged. "According to these records, you were properly notified. 3 certified letters." I wanted to grab that clipboard and shove it where the sun doesn't shine. Instead, I took a breath. My father didn't raise me to lose my cool in front of bullies. "Fine," I said, "but I want copies of everything. The meeting minutes, the letters, the permits, all of it." Karen's smile widened. "Of course! Soon as our legal review is complete. Should only take a few weeks." The excavator bucket bit into the corner post of my fence. 60 years of weathered cedar, installed by my grandfather's own hands, splintered like matchsticks. That's when I knew this wasn't about fence height. This was war. Have you ever stood there watching someone destroy something your family built, knowing you're powerless to stop it? That hollow feeling in your gut, like someone just reached in and twisted your insides? Well, that morning, watching my fence come down piece by piece, I learned something important. Sometimes the rules aren't there to protect you. They're there to protect them from you. That hollow feeling in your gut turned into pure rage as I watched my fence disappear, post by post. By 8 a.m., half my property line was gone. Karen supervised from her lawn chair like she was watching a parade. Every few minutes, she'd wave at passing neighbors, pointing at the destruction with obvious pride. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. My first stop was Miller's Grocery, small town Intel headquarters. The moment I walked through those glass doors, conversations stopped. Heads turned. Mrs. Fleming abandoned her shopping cart and beelined straight for me. "Tom Riley." Her voice carried across 3 aisles. "We heard you're refusing to follow homeowner association rules." Before I could answer, she was waving her phone around. "Karen sent us photos. Your fence does look awfully aggressive, doesn't it?" The photos showed my fence from an angle that made it look like a prison wall. Clever lighting, dramatic shadows, professional work. Karen had been planning this for weeks. That fence has been there since my grandfather. "Times change, Tom." Bill Henderson chimed in from the produce section. Rules exist for a reason. Property values, safety concerns. Safety concerns? I almost laughed. It's cedar planks and metal posts. Your father was sheriff for 20 years, Mrs. Fleming continued, loud enough for the whole store to hear. He understood the importance of following rules. Shame his son doesn't. That hit like a punch to the kidneys. My dad built his reputation on fairness and following the law. Now they were using his memory as a weapon against me. I grabbed a coffee from the counter and headed for the checkout. The teenage cashier, Sarah, I think, wouldn't make eye contact. Behind me, voices dropped to whispers, but I caught fragments. Always thought he was entitled. Father's badge went to his head. About time someone stood up to him. I paid for my coffee and walked out feeling like a pariah in my own hometown. But here's the thing about small towns. Secrets don't stay buried long, and I had 20 years of my father's investigative instincts running through my veins. My next stop was Murphy's Tavern, not for the beer. It was barely past 9 a.m., but for Rick Morrison. The Homeowner Association treasurer spent his lunch breaks there every day, nursing a burger and avoiding his wife's honey-do list. I found him in his usual corner booth, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. Rick, I slid into the seat across from him. We need to talk. He glanced around nervously like Karen might materialize from the shadows. Tom, listen, maybe you should just take down the fence. It's not worth the fight. What fight? According to Karen, this is all legal and proper. Rick's hands shook slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. She's got connections, you know, people in the county office, the planning department. Sometimes it's easier to just go along. Go along with what exactly? I leaned forward. Help me understand how a fence that's been legal for 60 years suddenly becomes a violation overnight. Rick's eyes darted to the door, then back to me. There was a meeting. I wasn't notified. Technical majority, he mumbled. 5 members present, you and 2 others absent. Democracy in action. Technical majority of what? Who showed up at this phantom meeting? He drained his coffee cup and stood up. Look, Tom, Karen's determined to make changes around here. Big changes. Your fence is just the beginning. As he walked away, his words echoed in my mind. Big changes, beginning. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. City Hall, county records, the planning commission. Anyone who might have copies of these mysterious documents Karen kept waving around. Same answer everywhere. We'll have to get back to you. Documents are under review. Under review, the new favorite phrase of bureaucrats and bullies. But Rick had let something slip. 5 members present. The Homeowner Association only had 12 active members. If 5 could make binding decisions for everyone, then the whole system was rigged from the start. I was starting to see the shape of Karen's game. And brother, she was playing for keeps. That afternoon, driving past the remains of my fence, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. A surveyor's truck parked on the empty lot next to my property. 2 men with measuring equipment taking readings along what used to be my fence line. They weren't just tearing down my fence. They were planning something bigger. They weren't just measuring my property line. They were surveying the lake access road. I parked my truck and walked over, trying to look casual. The older surveyor glanced up from his equipment, squinting in the afternoon sun. Afternoon, I said. What brings you folks out here? Property assessment. He wiped sweat from his forehead, checking easement boundaries for a potential development. Development. That word hit me like a cold slap. What kind of development? The younger guy looked nervous, started packing up equipment faster than necessary. We're not supposed to discuss specifics. But the damage was done. I knew what I was looking at. Someone wanted access to the lake, and my fence was blocking their path. I drove straight home and called my insurance company. 20 minutes on hold, then a cheerful voice. Mr. Riley, funny you should call. We just received notification about code violations on your property. We'll need to reassess your homeowner's policy. Reassess? Well, if the homeowner association determines your property doesn't meet community standards, it could affect your coverage rates. Or eligibility. I hung up and stared at the phone. Karen wasn't just taking my fence. She was coming after my insurance, my property value, my entire livelihood. Then the mail truck pulled up. The driver handed me a certified letter, thick envelope, official-looking seal. Inside, a notice from the county planning office scheduling an emergency inspection of my property for potential safety violations. Emergency inspection for a fence that had stood for 60 years without killing anyone. But that wasn't the worst part. At the bottom of the letter, in small print, failure to comply may result in condemnation proceedings and forced sale of property. Forced sale. My hands were shaking as I read those words again. This wasn't about fence height or property values. Someone wanted my land, and they were using Karen as their battering ram. I needed help, and I knew exactly who to call. "Dad, it's Tom. I need to see you." An hour later, my father was sitting at my kitchen table, reading through the stack of papers Karen's people had served me. At 72, Dan Riley still had the sharpest eyes in 3 counties. 20 years as sheriff, now working private investigations. If anyone could spot a setup, it was him. "Son," he said finally, "this stinks worse than a 3-day-old fish. Tell me something I don't know." He tapped the meeting minutes with his finger. "Look at these signatures. Same pen, same handwriting style. Someone signed multiple names. Seed signatures." I leaned closer. He was right. Subtle, but there. The lowercase g in every signature had the same distinctive loop. "That's not all," Dad continued. "These property assessment numbers, they're pulled from last year's records. Someone copied old data and changed the dates. Seed, old data. So what's our next move? We need to know who's really behind this, and I've got an idea." He stood up, grabbed his jacket. "Remember old Bill Harris, lives in that cabin by the lake? The Korean War vet? That's him. Bill sees everything that goes on around here. If someone's been sniffing around your property, he'll know about it." We drove to Bill's place as the sun started setting, found him on his porch cleaning an old rifle with practiced precision. Bill Harris was 78 years old and still sharp as a tack. "Dan Riley!" Bill stood up, grinning. "And young Tom. Heard you folks are having some trouble." "Bill," Dad said, "you see anything unusual around Tom's place lately? Strangers, surveyors, anyone who doesn't belong?" Bill's expression grew serious. "Funny you should ask. Yesterday evening I saw Karen Whitmore meeting with some fellow in an expensive suit, right there in her driveway, looking at plans or blueprints. You get a look at this guy? Tall, silver hair, driving a black BMW with dealer plates. They were pointing toward the lake, toward Tom's property. Bill spat tobacco juice over the porch rail. Looked like they were planning something big. Black BMW, dealer plates. Someone with money was pulling Karen's strings." "There's more," Bill continued. "Last week I caught that same fellow walking your fence line with a camera, taking pictures from every angle. When he saw me watching, he got in his car and left real quick. Seed photos." Dad and I exchanged glances. We were looking at a conspiracy, not a neighborhood dispute. "Bill," I said, "would you be willing to testify to what you saw?" "Son, your daddy kept this town safe for 20 years. If someone's trying to railroad his boy, they'll have to go through me first." Driving home, pieces of the puzzle started clicking together. The surveyor's talk about development, the expensive suit taking pictures, Karen's sudden obsession with my fence. Someone wanted to build something on the lake, and my property was standing in their way. But Karen had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated what happens when you mess with a sheriff's family. Time to show her how the Riley men fight back. But first, I needed more ammunition. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse. 27 years I'd been paying taxes on this property. 27 years of clean records. If Karen's people had filed legitimate complaints, there'd be a paper trail. The clerk at the records office was a sweet lady named Martha, who'd worked there since before I was born. She remembered when my dad used to bring me in as a kid during school breaks. "Tommy Riley," she smiled. "Heard you're having some troubles with that homeowner association. Martha, I need to see any complaints filed against my property in the last 6 months." She disappeared into the back room, came out with a thin folder. "Not much here, just one filing from 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks before the fence suddenly became a problem. I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop. Someone had filed a potential hazard report, claiming my fence posed a visual obstruction to emergency vehicle access. The signature at the bottom belonged to Dr. James Bradford, a name I'd never heard before. Martha, who is James Bradford? She frowned, typing into her computer. According to our records, he's listed as a resident at 1247 Lakeshore Drive. That's the vacant lot next to my property. Well, someone's paying taxes on it. Been current for the last 8 months. 8 months. Someone had bought the empty lot next to me and was using it to file complaints about my fence. This wasn't random harassment. This was a calculated land grab. I thanked Martha and drove straight to Lakeshore Drive. The lot was still empty, but there was a new mailbox with Bradford printed in neat letters. Fresh installation, maybe a week old. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Mr. Riley, this is James Bradford. I believe we need to discuss your property situation. Meet me at Murphy's Tavern at 2 p.m. today. The phantom neighbor wanted a face-to-face. I showed up 10 minutes early and grabbed a corner booth where I could watch the door. At exactly 2 o'clock, a tall man in an expensive suit walked in, silver hair, confident stride, scanning the room like he owned it. Mr. Riley, he extended a manicured hand. James Bradford, Lakeshore Development Corporation. Lakeshore Development. The pieces were falling into place. So you're not actually my neighbor, I said. He smiled, sitting down across from me. Not exactly, though I do own the adjacent property. He pulled out a leather folder, spread some papers across the table. I represent investors interested in developing the lake area. Your property is strategically important. The papers showed architectural drawings, luxury condos, a marina, a golf course, all of it built around lake access, with my property sitting right in the middle of their plans. Let me guess, I said. My fence is blocking your access road. Among other things. Bradford's smile never wavered. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer. 20% above market value, cash, close in 30 days. I looked at the number on his offer sheet. It was generous, more money than I'd see in 5 years of retirement. And if I say no? Well, that would be unfortunate. He gathered up his papers. The homeowner association has identified numerous violations on your property. Code enforcement will be conducting a full inspection next week. Sometimes these old properties, they don't age well. The threat was crystal clear. Sell, or they'd condemn the place and take it anyway. You know what, Bradford? I stood up, looking down at him. I think I'll take my chances with code enforcement. His smile finally cracked. That would be a mistake, Mr. Riley. We have very good relationships with the county officials. I walked out without another word, but my hands were shaking with rage. They weren't just stealing my property. They were bribing officials to do it. Back home, I found Dad sitting on what was left of my porch staring at the lake. How'd your meeting go, son? I told him everything. Bradford, Lakeshore Development, the 20% offer, the threats about code enforcement. Dad listened without interrupting, then stood up and brushed dust off his jeans. Son, in my 20 years wearing a badge, I learned one thing about bullies. They're only as strong as their weakest link. He pointed toward Karen's house. And right now, she's feeling pretty confident. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to remind folks around here what happens when you mess with my family. That evening, Dad made some phone calls. Old contacts from his sheriff days, people who owed him favors. By morning, we had confirmation of what we suspected. James Bradford had been meeting with county officials for months, greasing palms and making promises about the economic benefits of lakeside development. But Dad had found something else, something that made his eyes light up with that old predatory gleam I remembered from when he'd cornered dangerous suspects. Tom, he said, grinning like a wolf, did you know that Karen Whitmore's been paying property taxes on a house that's listed as a rental property, not a primary residence? So, according to homeowner association bylaws, only primary residents can serve as officers or vote in meetings. Every decision Karen had made, every vote she'd cast, every rule she'd enforced, all of it was illegal. We had her, but Karen was about to show us how dirty she could play. The next morning, I woke up to red and blue lights flashing through my bedroom window. 2 sheriff's deputies stood at what was left of my front gate, and Karen was there too, pointing at my house like I was some kind of fugitive. I threw on clothes and walked outside, heart hammering against my ribs. Mr. Riley? The younger deputy looked uncomfortable. We have a report of threatening behavior. Someone claims you approached them yesterday making violent threats. Violent threats? Karen stepped forward, fake tears glistening in her eyes. He cornered me at Murphy's Tavern, said he'd make me regret ever moving to this neighborhood. I feared for my safety. The lie was so brazen it took my breath away. I hadn't even seen Karen yesterday, let alone threatened her. Officers, there's been a misunderstanding. Sir, we're going to need you to come with us. The older deputy's hand rested on his handcuffs. Just for questioning, have you ever felt that moment when everything you thought you knew about justice crumbles right in front of you? When the system you trusted your whole life suddenly turns against you? That's what it felt like, sitting in that interrogation room for 3 hours while they grilled me about threats I never made. They finally released me without charges. Not enough evidence, but the damage was done. By evening, everyone in town had heard that Tom Riley had been arrested for threatening his neighbor. Walking into Miller's grocery felt like running a gauntlet. Conversations stopped. People turned away. The teenage cashier who'd avoided eye contact before now looked genuinely frightened. Mrs. Fleming cornered me by the produce section. Tom Riley, I am ashamed. Your poor father must be rolling in his grave. My father's not dead, Mrs. Fleming. He's at home waiting for me. Well, he should be ashamed too, raising a son who threatens defenseless women. And I wanted to scream that it was all lies. But who would believe me? Karen had played this perfectly, one word against another, and she'd made sure to get her story out first. That night, Dad found me sitting on my back porch, staring at the lake and wondering if I should just take Bradford's money and disappear. Son, you look like someone ran over your dog. They're gonna win, Dad. Karen's got the whole town convinced I'm some kind of dangerous lunatic. He sat down beside me, creaking porch boards under his weight. You know, when I was sheriff, I learned something about investigations. The more desperate someone gets, the sloppier they become. Karen doesn't look desperate to me. She looks like she's winning. That arrest report today, I made some calls. Dad pulled out a small notebook. Karen filed her complaint at 8:15 a.m., but according to Murphy's Tavern security footage, she didn't leave her house until 9:30. Security footage? Murphy got cameras installed last month after some break-ins. He was happy to let an old friend take a look. Dad grinned. Karen filed a police report about threats that supposedly happened before she even left her house. So she lied about the time? She lied about everything. But here's the interesting part. At 8 a.m., when she was supposedly being threatened by you, she was actually on the phone in her driveway. 40-minute conversation with someone. Murphy's camera caught the whole thing. My pulse started racing. Can we see who she was talking to? Already working on it. But Tom, there's something else. Remember those property tax records we looked at? I did some more digging. He flipped pages in his notebook. Karen Whitmore doesn't just rent out her house. She's been collecting rental income while claiming homestead exemption on her taxes. That's fraud. How much are we talking about? $15,000 over 3 years. Felony territory. I stared at him. Karen wasn't just breaking homeowner association rules. She was a criminal. But would anyone believe us over her? Dad, even if we can prove all this, Bradford still has his hooks in county officials. They'll find a way to condemn my property anyway. Maybe, but fraudulent tax claims? That's federal territory, son. IRS doesn't care how many friends you have in county government. The next day brought more bad news. A certified letter from code enforcement scheduling my emergency inspection for Monday morning. Attached was a preliminary report listing 17 potential violations, from inadequate drainage to non-compliant electrical systems. 17 violations on a property that had passed every inspection for 27 years. But that afternoon, Dad got the break we needed. His contact at the phone company came through with Karen's call records from yesterday morning. Son, he said, waving the printout like a winning lottery ticket. Guess who Karen spent 40 minutes talking to at 8 a.m.? Bradford? Better. She was talking to Deputy Martinez, the same officer who took her statement about your supposed threats. The conspiracy was bigger than we thought. Karen hadn't just lied about the threats. She'd coordinated the whole thing with someone inside the sheriff's department. We've got them, Dad. Not yet, but we're getting close. He folded the call records carefully. Monday morning, when those code inspectors show up, we're going to be ready for them. What do you have in mind? Dad's eyes had that predatory gleam again. Sometimes, son, The best defense is to let your enemies think they're winning, right up until the moment you spring the trap. That weekend, I watched Karen hosting what looked like a victory party in her backyard. Bradford's BMW was parked in her driveway, along with several other expensive cars I didn't recognize. They were celebrating my defeat before the battle was even over. That was their first mistake. Monday morning arrived like a firing squad, and the code inspectors came armed for war. 3 vehicles pulled up at 7 a.m. sharp. County enforcement, building department, even someone from environmental services. Karen stood on her porch in a bright yellow sundress, coffee mug in hand, watching like she was observing her own coronation. The lead inspector was a thin man named Peterson, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. He approached with a clipboard thick enough to choke a horse. "Mr. Riley, we're here for the comprehensive property assessment." "Come on in," I said, stepping aside. "But I think you should know. My father's here documenting everything for our attorney." Peterson's confidence flickered for just a second. Behind him, Dad emerged from the kitchen with a professional camera and a legal pad, looking every inch the retired law enforcement officer he was. "Gentlemen," Dad said pleasantly, "I'll be taking photographs and notes for our records. Hope that's not a problem." The inspection took 4 hours. They crawled under the house, poked around the electrical system, measured every window and door frame. Dad shadowed them like a bloodhound, snapping pictures and asking pointed questions about regulations and standards. By 11 a.m., Peterson was sweating despite the cool morning air. "Mr. Riley," he said finally, "I need to make some calls. We'll have our report ready by end of business today." After they left, Dad and I sat on the porch reviewing his notes. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Actually, not bad at all. These guys were fishing. Half their measurements were wrong, and when I pointed out the actual building codes, Peterson looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock." "So they can't condemn the property?" "Not legitimately, but that doesn't mean they won't try." Dad closed his notebook. "Son, it's time to make our move." That afternoon, we drove to the federal building in the county seat. Dad had arranged a meeting with Special Agent Sarah Chen from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in tax fraud cases. "Mr. Riley," she said, reviewing the documents we'd brought, "these are serious allegations. Tax fraud, conspiracy to defraud. If what you're showing me is accurate, we're looking at multiple felonies." Dad spread out the evidence: Karen's rental income records, her fraudulent homestead exemption claims, the phone records showing coordination with Deputy Martinez. Payoff: old data. "There's more," I added. "We have witness testimony about meetings between Karen Whitmore and James Bradford from Lakeshore Development Corporation." The agent Chen looked up sharply. "Lakeshore Development? We've had our eye on them for months. Suspected money laundering through development projects." "Money laundering?" "They've been buying properties through shell companies, then flipping them to offshore investors at inflated prices. Classic scheme." She made notes in her file. "Your case might be the key to cracking their whole operation." We left the federal building feeling like we'd just lit a very long fuse. But Karen wasn't done with us yet. That evening, I got a call from my insurance company. "Mr. Riley, I'm afraid we have to cancel your homeowner's policy, effective immediately." "Cancel? Why?" "We received an official report from County Code Enforcement listing multiple safety violations. We can't provide coverage for a property that's been condemned as uninhabitable." Condemned as uninhabitable. They'd done it. Used their corrupt inspection to make my property legally worthless. I was still processing this when Dad burst through my front door, waving a piece of paper like a battle flag. "Tom, Emergency Homeowner Association meeting tonight, 7 p.m. at the community center." Let me guess. They're voting to expel me from the association. Better than that. They're voting on a special assessment to cover legal expenses related to problem properties. $25,000 per household. $25,000. Karen was charging the entire neighborhood for the privilege of stealing my land. "Dad, we can't let them—" "Son," he interrupted, grinning like a shark, "we're not going to stop them. We're going to let them hang themselves." At 7 p.m., the community center was packed. Karen stood at the front like a general addressing her troops, Bradford lurking in the back row like a spider in his web. "Before we begin," Karen announced, I want everyone to know that Mr. Riley has been making threats against residents and refuses to comply with basic safety standards." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw neighbors I'd known for years looking at me like I'd grown horns. "The special assessment," Karen continued, "will allow us to pursue legal action against non-compliant homeowners and protect our community values." She called for a vote. Hands shot up around the room. 18 in favor, 2 opposed. "Motion carries," Karen declared triumphantly. That's when Dad stood up in the back of the room. "Excuse me," he said in his old sheriff's voice, the one that could stop a bar fight at 50 paces. "Before this vote becomes official, there's something everyone should know." He walked slowly to the front, every eye in the room following him. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dan Riley. Some of you remember me as your sheriff. Tonight, I'm here as a concerned citizen who's discovered some troubling facts about your homeowner association." Karen's face went pale. "Mr. Riley, you're out of order. This meeting is illegal," Dad said calmly. He pulled out a folder, thick with documents. "According to county tax records, Karen Whitmore lists her residence here as rental property, not a primary home. Under your own bylaws, she's not eligible to hold office or vote in association matters." The room erupted, voices raised, neighbors turning to stare at Karen, confusion and anger mixing like a dangerous cocktail. "Furthermore," Dad continued, raising his voice above the noise, "every vote she's participated in, every decision she's made as your president, is null and void, including tonight's special assessment." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But Dad wasn't finished. Payoff signatures. "I also have handwriting analysis showing that the meeting minutes authorizing the demolition of my son's fence contain forged signatures, 5 different names, all written by the same person." He held up the analysis, and I could see people in the front row leaning forward, studying the evidence. "Your association president, ladies and gentlemen, is a fraud and a criminal." In the stunned silence that followed, Bradford stood up from the back row and quietly slipped out the door. Smart man. The ship was sinking, and he didn't want to go down with it. The room exploded into chaos after Dad's bombshell, but Karen wasn't going down without a fight. "This is ridiculous," she shouted over the angry voices. "Dan Riley is making desperate accusations to protect his criminal son." But the damage was spreading like wildfire. Neighbors were pulling out their phones, some calling spouses, others probably Googling property records to verify Dad's claims. Mrs. Fleming stood up, her face flushed with embarrassment and rage. "Karen, is this true? Have you been lying about living here?" "I maintain a residence here," Karen stammered. "The tax classification is just a technicality." "A technicality?" Bill Henderson's voice boomed from the middle of the room. "You've been charging us special assessments while cheating on your own taxes?" That's when Rick Morrison, the treasurer who'd been hiding in Karen's shadow, finally found his spine. "She made me sign blank checks," he said quietly, then louder as heads turned. "Karen said they were for emergency repairs, but I saw the amounts later. Thousands of dollars to companies I'd never heard of." The crowd turned on Karen like a pack of wolves. 20 years of accumulated grievances, every petty rule, every arbitrary fine, every power trip, came pouring out in a torrent of accusations. But Karen had one last card to play. "You want to know the truth?" she screamed, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "This whole neighborhood is sitting on a gold mine. Lakeshore Development offered to buy every property here for double its value, turn this place into something special. Tom Riley's stubbornness is costing all of you millions." The room went dead quiet. "Millions?" someone whispered from the back. Karen seized the moment. James Bradford has investors lined up, ready to transform this area into a luxury resort community. Property values would skyrocket, but Tom's fence blocks the access road they need. I felt the mood in the room shifting. Greed was battling with principles, and greed was winning. "So you decided to steal my property to make everyone else rich." I stood up, voice carrying to every corner of the room. I decided to do what was best for the community. That's when Dad played his final card, payoff photos. "Son, remember those photos Bill Harris mentioned? The ones Bradford took of your property?" I nodded, not sure where he was going with this. Dad pulled out a manila envelope, thick with 8 by 10 photographs. Agent Chen from the IRS was very interested in these pictures. Seems Bradford wasn't just photographing fences. He spread the photos across the front table. They showed Bradford and Karen at various locations around the lake, but also something else. Stacks of cash changing hands, documents being signed in car back seats, meetings in secluded spots along the shoreline. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dad announced, "these photos document a criminal conspiracy, bribery, tax evasion, fraud. The FBI is opening a full investigation into Lakeshore Development Corporation and their local accomplices." Karen's face went white as a sheet. In the back of the room, I noticed Deputy Martinez quietly slipping toward the exit. "Furthermore," Dad continued, "any property sales connected to this scheme will be considered proceeds of criminal activity. That means if you sold your house to Lakeshore Development, you might not see a dime." The greed bubble popped instantly. Neighbors who'd been calculating their potential windfalls suddenly looked sick to their stomachs. Karen made one last desperate play. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually, we can." Agent Chen stepped into the room like an avenging angel, flanked by 2 other federal agents. "Karen Whitmore, you're under arrest for tax fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and violation of federal racketeering statutes." The handcuffs clicked with a sound that echoed through the silent room. As they led Karen away, she turned to glare at me one last time. "This isn't over, Riley." But it was. We all knew it was. The next morning, my phone started ringing before sunrise. Neighbors calling to apologize, to distance themselves from Karen's scheme, to ask if I'd accept their votes for a new association president. I declined the nomination. I'd had enough of homeowner politics to last 3 lifetimes. But the best call came from Peterson, the code inspector who'd tried to condemn my property. "Mr. Riley, I wanted you to know, that inspection report has been officially withdrawn. Your property meets all county standards." "What changed your mind, Peterson?" Long pause. "Let's just say federal agents asking questions tends to clarify one's memory about building codes." A week later, I was sitting on my newly rebuilt porch. Same cedar planks, same metal posts, same height as before, when a moving truck pulled up to Karen's house. Her sister was cleaning out the place, loading boxes with the kind of grim efficiency that comes from dealing with family disasters. She saw me watching and walked over. "Tom, I'm Sarah, Karen's sister. I wanted to apologize for what she put you through." "You don't need to apologize for her choices." "Maybe not, but I need to tell you something." Sarah looked tired, older than her years. Karen's always been like this. Even as kids, she'd lie about the rules of games to make sure she won. I hoped she'd grown out of it. Some people never do. The federal prosecutor says she's looking at 5 to 10 years. Tax fraud, conspiracy, they're throwing everything at her. I felt a moment of sympathy for Karen, then remembered the sound of my grandfather's fence being torn down by her hired goons. "Sarah, I hope she gets the help she needs." She nodded and walked back to the moving truck. That afternoon, I got one more visitor, James Bradford, but not the confident developer I'd met at Murphy's Tavern. This Bradford looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. "Riley," he said, stopping at my gate, "I wanted you to know Lakeshore Development is filing for bankruptcy. The federal investigation froze all our assets." "I'm sorry to hear that." He almost smiled. "No, you're not, and you shouldn't be. What we tried to do to you, it was wrong." "Why?" I asked. "Why go to all this trouble for one piece of property?" "Because men like me always think there's a price for everything, a number that'll make anyone walk away from what they love." He looked out at the lake, then back at me. "I never met anyone who couldn't be bought, until I met you." That evening, Dad and I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. "So what now, son?" I thought about everything we'd been through, the false accusations, the corrupt inspections, the neighbors who'd turned against me, the victory that came at such a high cost. Now I rebuild. The fence, the trust, the peace. I gestured toward the lake. "Maybe I'll finally fix that old dock, do some fishing." "Sounds like a plan." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the water lap against the shoreline. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. In small towns like ours, there's always another Karen waiting in the wings, another scheme brewing under the surface. And when that day comes, they'll find out what my father taught me. Sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything. 6 months later, I was replacing a rotted board on my dock when I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me. Tom Riley? I turned to see a young woman in a business suit, maybe 30 years old, with the kind of confident smile that set off every alarm bell in my head. I'm Jessica Morrison. I represent the new Homeowner Association Board. Though Morrison, same last name as Rick, the former treasurer who'd helped enable Karen's scheme. What can I do for you, Miss Morrison? Actually, it's Mrs. Morrison. Rick's my husband. She pulled out a tablet, swiped to some official-looking documents. The new board has been reviewing association bylaws, and we've identified some inconsistencies in property boundaries. Here we go again. See, your dock extends 12 feet into what we believe may be association common area. The previous administration never addressed this violation. I set down my hammer and looked at this woman, young enough to be my daughter, standing there with that same entitled confidence Karen used to wear like armor. Jessica, let me ask you something. Did your husband ever mention what happened to the last person who tried to steal my property? Her smile flickered. This isn't about theft, Mr. Riley. It's about community standards and property compliance. Community standards. I wiped sawdust off my hands. That's exactly what Karen Whitmore said before the FBI arrested her. This is completely different. Is it? I stood up and she took an instinctive step backward. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the same play with different actors. Jessica's tablet trembled slightly in her hands. The board has already voted. You have 30 days to remove the dock or face legal action. That's when I heard the screen door slam behind me. Dad walked out onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, wearing his old sheriff's department t-shirt. Morning, folks. Beautiful day, isn't it? The psychological effect was immediate. Jessica Morrison went from confident bureaucrat to nervous young woman in about 2 seconds. I was just explaining to Mr. Riley about the dock situation, she said, voice an octave higher than before. Ah, the dock. Dad walked down to join us, every step deliberate and measured. You know, I was just thinking about that dock this morning. Built it myself in 1987, right after Tom bought the property. Used the original survey markers to make sure it stayed well within his property lines. The association has different surveys. I'm sure they do. Dad's voice carried that old sheriff authority that could make hardened criminals confess to jaywalking. Tell me, Jessica. Can I call you Jessica? Do you know what happened to the last group of people who tried to use fake surveys to steal my son's property? She shook her head. Federal prison, 5 to 10 years each. He sipped his coffee. Turns out the FBI takes a very dim view of real estate fraud. Jessica was backing away now, tablet clutched to her chest like a shield. This isn't over, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're right, I said. It's not over, because next time someone comes to my property with fake documents and fraudulent claims, I'm not going to wait for federal agents to sort it out. She hurried back up the path, heels clicking on gravel like a nervous heartbeat. After she left, Dad and I finished the dock repair in comfortable silence. When the last board was nailed in place, he stood up and stretched his back. Think she'll be back? Probably not, but someone will be. I looked out across the lake, watching a great blue heron fishing in the shallows. There's always someone who thinks they can take what isn't theirs. And what'll you do when they come? I thought about Karen in federal prison, about Bradford's ruined development company, about the neighbors who'd learned the hard way that greed makes people stupid. Same thing we did this time, Dad. Same thing you taught me when I was a kid watching you work. I picked up my tools, started walking back toward the house. We'll let them think they're winning, right up until the moment they realize they've beaten themselves. That evening, I got a call from Agent Chen at the IRS. Tom, thought you'd want to know. We just arrested 6 county officials connected to the Lakeshore development case. Bribery, conspiracy, the whole 9 yards. Any of them involved in my property inspection? Peterson was the first to flip, gave us names, dates, dollar amounts. Apparently Bradford was paying off half the county planning office. After I hung up, I sat on my porch watching the stars come out over the lake. The fence Karen had torn down was rebuilt and stronger than ever. The dock she'd tried to steal was repaired and ready for fishing season. The community she'd tried to control had learned what happens when good people stay silent too long. But I knew this peace wouldn't last forever. In America, there's always another developer looking for easy money, another bureaucrat willing to bend the rules, another Karen waiting to declare war on her neighbors. And when they come, because they will come, they'll learn what my father taught me 40 years ago when he pinned on his sheriff's badge for the first time. Sometimes the good guys win, sometimes justice actually works, and sometimes, if you're willing to fight for what's yours and never back down, you can beat the bullies who think money and connections make them untouchable. They'll learn what Karen learned, what Bradford learned, what Jessica Morrison is probably learning right now as she goes home to explain to her husband why their grand scheme failed before it even started. They'll learn that some things aren't for sale, some fences can't be torn down, and some neighbors fight back. If this story hit close to home for you, I'd appreciate that like button. We've all got a Karen in our neighborhood, and we've all got a choice to make when they come for what's ours. Thanks for sticking with me through this whole mess. And remember, when someone tries to tell you what you can't do on your own property, sometimes the only answer that works is the one my father taught me. Stand your ground.